So study 1, looking again specifically from the firm preference direction. I start off and I have 2 main theories that support this research here, looking specifically at the person-organization fit from Christoph Brown et al. This talks about the alignment between a candidate's values and the culture of the firm. More simply, a lot of individuals look at this as essentially culture fit. And then I look at also the person-job fit, also developed by Christoph Brown a little bit later in 2005. And this looks at the alignment between the individual's skills and the job that they are applying for, or the job requirements. In my study here, I am operationalizing this, as I said, as the candidate's discipline match. Going through my hypotheses, I posit that the levels of the candidate's PO fit is positively associated with the firm's preference to hire. I posit that the candidate's discipline choice aligns with the role, or PJ fit, positively is associated with firm preference. And third, I posit that the PO fit moderates the relationship between the discipline match and the firm's preference to hire, such that when PO fit is high, the relationship is stronger, and when PO fit is low, it is not as strong. Going through briefly through my methodology. Essentially, I did a quantitative cross-sectional survey. I was focusing on I was focusing on public accounting that was located in the United States, specifically going through CPA societies, and my sample size was an N of 73 of public accounting professionals. While the sample size is modest, it does limit the statistical power for detecting significant interaction effects. However, the main effects remain strong. And then the analysis I performed was a general linear model, a Wilcoxon sign rank test, Friedman test, and paired t-tests. So I will go through those now. A couple of key measures so we can all be on the same page here. I identify firm preference as the likelihood to hire a candidate. The PO fit, I align very closely to the PO fit theory. So the candidate's more or less going to be described as whether or not they're going to be an immediate fit or not, so very binomial measure in nature. I presented this by showing some hypothetical hiring scenarios, and I'll walk through those in a minute. The CPA discipline match. I look at the degree to which the discipline aligns with the job. So I'm going to look specifically at tax, and then audit, and then consulting. I measured this by some help and hinder sliders, and then also giving some ranked choices as well. And then lastly, the importance ratings. I do just a general Likert scale for discipline versus the PO fit. So my first research question. I wanted to know, how does a candidate's PO fit with the firm's impact on hiring decisions? I posited that the PO fit is positively associated with the firm preference. The way I asked this is, as you can see here, here's 2 examples of the types of questions. More or less, I was asking the firms, or operationalized as the CPAs who were answering these questions, to assess whether or not, or how likely they were to hire a candidate. They got 4 different questions that had a combination of whether or not they were an immediate fit or not with the company's culture. That was measuring the PO fit. And then they were also asked whether or not this individual had that preferred discipline, so looking at that PJ fit. There was 4 questions in total. Every individual, every participant was asked all 4 questions. I used a repeated measures general linear regression model here, and I have that written up here, looking at specifically the main effects of PO fit. looking at the main effects of the PJ fit, and then looking at the interaction between the two. When I pulled the results as follows, I'm going to focus us first on the main effect of the PO fit. As we can see here, this is a strong and positive, significant effect on, so this is essentially saying that firms do care about the person-organization fit, or in other words, the culture fit of a candidate. Therefore, hypothesis 1 was supported. Going into my second and third research question. So second research question, as a refresher, was do public accounting firms prefer a certain discipline based on the job role? And then if so, does the discipline match affect those hiring preferences? I do posit that the discipline choice does impact hiring preferences overall. The way I measured this, or the way I surveyed this, is I asked my participants to look at each individual position. So I asked them tax position, audit, and consulting. And for all three, I asked them to measure on a scale of -50 to a +50 to help or hinder, or does this help or hinder a candidate in getting hired for your firm? So they were able to measure for each individual discipline. I went ahead and then did a t-test of the different rankings here, comparing the two. So as you can see, we are looking specifically at tax first, comparing the TCP, the tax compliance discipline, to the business reporting and analytics, and found that this was a positive and significant value. So the way that we would interpret this is that they prefer TCP over BAR. I did the same thing for the other couple of combinations to essentially assess more or less a rank. So overall, what ended up happening is for the tax position, firms would prefer a tax discipline. That would make the most sense here. Followed that by the business reporting and analytics, and then lastly, the information systems and controls discipline. I did the same t-test for all of the variety of roles. So here is my audit role. Again, did the same test. We found significant values here. So we're seeing overall that for an audit role, firms prefer the business analytics and reporting discipline, followed by the information systems and controls, and then lastly, the tax. And then for consulting, we find something somewhat similar in that the business analytics reporting discipline is the highest overall, followed by tax, and then lastly, the information systems and control. I do want to point out that while all the p-values are significant, the comparison between whether or not tax and ISC and then tax and BAR are important are a little bit less strong in strength, and we'll get to that here in a second as I discuss this. Okay. Next then, I really wanted to solidify and make sure I understood what the rankings were, making sure that these were significant, that these were essentially what I was finding. The other element to this is I wanted to essentially present an option of the firm saying, I'm indifferent, I don't care one way or the other. So here's some examples of the way I asked the questions. I essentially gave them a this or that or I'm indifferent type option, and there were 9 questions in total here. 3 questions per position. Okay. So a Friedman's test. This is very much similar to an ANOVA test here. However, because my data is non-parametric in nature, I needed to run with a Friedman's test instead. And what this essentially does is it goes ahead and takes some mean rankings. And I have some references here for you. But overall, it essentially puts a ranking system into play here. So overall, what we're seeing is that similar to my t-test that we were looking at earlier, for tax, it is in fact most preferred that a candidate have a tax compliance discipline, followed by BAR and then ISC. For audit, we're seeing BAR still standing out at top. And then for consulting, again, bar is on the top. What I want to point out again with consulting is the ISC and the TCP are very, very close in nature with the means. This may be because when presented with those choices, more people chose indifferent versus not. So essentially, at the end of the day, what this is telling us is that if a candidate is interested in a consulting position, they would want to sit for the bar exam. Otherwise, ISC and TCP are seen about the same. Now looking at some descriptives of the preferences here, just again, we're looking mostly at the help and hinder type questions, getting a different view. Again, this supports the direction of what I was talking about just a little bit ago. I wanted to, now that we have essentially established, yes, firms do prefer certain disciplines for the specific positions. I now went into to see, okay, does that then impact overall hiring preference as seen with this model, same model that we used earlier. So I'm looking more specifically at this interaction effect here of the PJ fit. So this discipline match, again, is very significant and strong and significant in nature. So essentially, as we are seeing here, my hypothesis too is supported that firms do care about the discipline, and in fact, they do have a specific discipline match here. Research question 4. How does a candidate's PO fit influence the CPA discipline match on hiring preference? And I posit that it has a positive impact on that relationship, such that, again, the stronger that the relationship is, when PO fit is high, the stronger the relationship between PJ fit and firm versus when it is low. Revisiting the same question, so again, this is the 2x2 design that I'm looking at to be able to understand really what is that interaction between the two. So in a layman's terms, essentially, I am asking, would you more prefer somebody who is a good fit with your culture, maybe a good person to be around, but maybe doesn't have the discipline you prefer? Or would you take the opposite direction and rather somebody who is a good fit, is not as good of a fit, but does have the discipline that you would prefer? So I start off by first looking at the descriptives, the general means and standard deviations, the mean ranking, or the means and standard deviations of the sample here. This just gives a high-level overview of what firms would prefer. Again, this scale is from 0 to 100. So the higher the mean, of course, the more likely they were to, the more often they preferred a specific direction. So what we're seeing here, as not a surprise to I'm sure any of us, when presented with the scenario of somebody having a preferred discipline and was an immediate fit, they were more likely to hire versus the opposite direction, not a preferred discipline and not an immediate PO fit here. What I'm more interested in is looking at the means in between. Looking at, again, that comparison between PO fit, PJ fit. You know, are they an immediate fit but don't have the preferred discipline, or do they have the preferred discipline but they're not an immediate fit? Revisiting the model one more time, just as a reminder, again, looking at this interaction effect here. So when we look at the interaction effect, we are finding a significant interaction effect here. Again, although the model is essentially, or sorry, the sample size is a little bit smaller. So this interaction should be essentially taken with a grain of salt at this point in time. But given the current sample size that I do have, this is a significant interaction. I did want to, so what this essentially showed is that there is an interaction here. And then again, I wanted to understand more or less the direction of that. So I took the mean differences here of these effects and looked at essentially what was the difference between when somebody had a preferred discipline or not, looking at it as an immediate effect or an immediate fit versus a not an immediate fit here. What we're seeing is when we look at this, again, they are very strong and significant. And so what this is telling us overall is that when somebody is an immediate fit, somebody has a strong culture fit, the discipline essentially matters a little bit more. That they care more about what that discipline matches versus somebody who's not as strong. It is not non-existent, it just isn't as strong of an effect here. I have a visual here, albeit the slope of it looks very, very similar with the nature of things. What I want to show again is when we're going from the not preferred discipline to preferred, there in both cases is an increase, which would make sense. Of course, somebody who has a preferred discipline versus not, of course, we're going to take the person who meets the credentials that we want. What I'm wanting to point out here is essentially this gap and how much this is a little bit more increased, that the slope is a little bit higher. In other words, it does go ahead and increase the strength of the discipline overall. So all in all, my hypothesis 3 was therefore supported. I do have additional robustness checks at the end, especially for my committee if you are interested in, where I went ahead and did some additional studies of looking at indifference and looking at a little bit more of that interaction there. On to study 2 now. So this is, again, looking at the different perspective. I now went to the opposite side of the table, so to speak, and was looking at candidates. Understanding what motivates a candidate, understanding whether a candidate understands what firm preferences are. So first, the theories that are driving this study here, we start off with the theory of planned behavior. This was developed by Eisen in 1991 and essentially says that behavior is driven by the intentions, which are shaped by our attitudes, by our subjective norms, and by our perceived behavioral control. So for the purpose of this study, I'm going ahead and looking at the attitudes as like the interest and value that they see, the subjective norms as the firm's expectations or firm preferences, and then the competence in passing as the perceived control here. I also am using the self-determination theory here. Developed by D.C. and Ryan in 1985. This theory essentially shows or looks at the elements of motivation, looking at how do we categorize motivation, whether something is more intrinsic in nature, extrinsic, or amotivation, which is like the lack of motivation altogether. So in this study, I'm using things such as like interest and challenge as examples of intrinsic motivational factors, and then extrinsics, things such as like the salary or the prestige, job opportunities, things of that nature. Prior studies do show that in tax and audit, especially, they were motivated by intrinsic factors to essentially choose that area of expertise. But specifically in the context of the CPA Evolution exam, that has not been yet investigated. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm more or less bouncing off of my first essay here, understanding that now that we have understood what firm preferences are as far as discipline goes, in that TCP is more preferred for tax rules and BAR is more preferred for consulting or auditing, and that overall, however, that they prefer somebody who's just an immediate fit versus somebody who has a preferred discipline. The gap still remains in understanding whether or not candidates see that or can perceive that. So my 4 hypotheses are essentially more or less 2. The first hypothesis is looking at specifically the motivation. I posit that, that candidates are more motivated by intrinsic factors, again, such as like interest, versus extrinsic, so job opportunities, and when they're thinking about or deciding which CPA discipline do they want. For H2, I broke it into three. Again, I'm looking at the three separate job roles: tax, audit, and consulting. For all three, I do posit that there will not be a significant difference between what the candidates perceive as a firm preference versus what the actual firm preference is. So my design is a non-experimental cross-sectional survey here. I went and surveyed our upper level and graduate accounting students from a variety of different schools around the area. And this was distributed as requested to the students through the various classes. Survey was administered anonymously and asked a list of questions, some of which are very similar to that were asked of the firms when assessing firm preference. So I started off first asking whether or not they had an interest in sitting for the CPA or not, followed up with, if you do have an interest, what discipline are you intending to sit for? Then I asked them what their motivations were for that. And then some of the questions that are similar to my first survey, understanding what are your perceived firm preferences for each three different job types. I did another follow-up question, more or less asking the same thing, of the 9 forced options, and then of course some demographics. Key measures, looking at, of course, motivation. I have 14 different factors that we're looking at, such as intrinsic, interest and fit, and then extrinsic, salary and jobs prospects. I look at perceived firm preference. So this is the candidate's assumptions about what the employer is preferring. And then that alignment at the end. So understanding if we're comparing the candidate's perceives firm preference versus the actual firm preference here. The analysis, I did a variety of different tests, including some t-tests using a theoretical designed construct. I did go ahead and do an EFA for multiple iterations, and I will walk you through a couple of those. Did some non-parametric binomial tests, did some t-tests of the candidates' perceptions, the Friedman test and Wilcox and signed rank, which are going to be additional elements that I included in the appendix here. So on to the research questions. First, I'm looking at what motivates a candidate, candidate's discipline choice. And is the motivation mostly due to internal, external, or multiple factors? For that second research question, I do posit that it would be more internal in nature rather than external factors that would more so motivate a candidate to choose a specific discipline. So to answer my first question, I did go through and I gave my candidates, my participants, these 14 different terms. They essentially rated them on a Likert scale of 1 to 5, 1 being there's no influence on my decision, and 5 being there's a very high influence. I did put them in order of means. So what we can see here is overall, the top rated factor is long-term career goals. This is what's motivating them on deciding a specific discipline. The second most is interest. I find this topic very interesting to me. And then the last one will make me more well-rounded, essentially making me, overall having a very good wide variety in accounting. I did go ahead then and separate this out into intrinsic motivational factors and extrinsic, just so that we can get a good view of this overall. So these are the theory-driven factors. This is supported by the self-determination theory, and so this is how I categorize these. Here's a correlation matrix showing all 14 factors compared to each other. I did go and highlight Some specific ones that are more highly correlated. Overall, what I want to point out, though, is that none were extremely highly correlated. And I also I ordered them in order of intrinsic versus extrinsic. So the box signifies essentially the interactions between the intrinsic factors. The rest are all extrinsic. Doing the paired t-test. Again, this is grouping these factors up based on theory. So four factors for the intrinsic and then 10 factors for the extrinsic. When comparing the means, we can see that the intrinsic overall had a higher mean. This is a strong and significant result. So given this, my first hypothesis for the study was supported. This wasn't just enough. We needed to go in and really understand the constructs. So we did go ahead. I did conduct an EFA on all 14 factors or items all taken together to see how they would load. As we can see here, overall, they were actually, in fact, all 14 items were loaded into 3 different factors rather than the expected 2. Cronbach alphas for them of the first 2 are high and significant. However, the third is a little bit less, has a little bit lower of a reliability than we would be expecting. So this construct may require further refinement. So this third factor that we're looking at is looking at whether or not it's easier to pass or not, and then the challenge, which are more or less linked together. I then wanted to break this down again, a couple of different iterations of looking at this EFA. I wanted to see if I took my theory-driven constructs and put those items all into an EFA, would it still load it all into one? As we can see here, yes, it does. It loads all 4 of the intrinsic factors into one loading with a significant Cronbach alpha. I then did the same thing with the 10 extrinsic factors. What we're finding here is that, again, it ended up breaking these extrinsic theory-driven factors into 2 different factor loadings. What we're seeing again is that the first factor has a strong Cronbach alpha. However, the second factor, again, might need a little bit of work here. I think it would also be worth noting that I did take a look at the Cronbach alpha for all 10 items all together again. And then the alpha for all 10 items not broken into the 2 factors did come out as a 0.75, which is again fairly significant as we're looking at this. So this stands to reason or more or less supports that my theory-driven constructs are safe to be able to go and mix those or test those based on the theory-driven constructs. Couple more research questions here. First, can candidates accurately identify firm preferences? And then if there was a mismatch, where is that mismatch found? I do for H3, I just combine the 3 here rather than showing you all 3. For the H2, for all positions, I do posit that there will be a significant alignment between the 2 candidates, the perceptions versus what is actually happening. So I'm pulling back again, showing you guys this ranked preference here. We're seeing that I essentially ask the candidates similar shaped questions, and that I give them 2 disciplines and then ask them if they think that the firm would be indifferent. So this is 9 questions altogether. I then coded the responses here. So for example, if I was asking about a tax roll and the participant marked TCP, I would then recode it to a 1 to show that that was an agreement with the firm preference. And then if there was anything but the TCP, I would mark it as a 0. So the means, in short, are showing the level of agreements with the firm preference. And overall, we can actually see that all are strong and significant, essentially saying that students are able to accurately assess what our firm preferences are. I did also go and, just for curiosity's sake then, as I mentioned before, I did do the Friedman test, the binomial test, and the Wilcoxon signed rank test to see, again, are they able to accurately rank them in the correct order as well? And I did find that, again, they do align overall when looking at those separately. And then addressing my last research question, I don't have a hypothesis to go along with this. This was more just for curiosity's sake. But understanding, do candidates actually intend to align their discipline choice with the firm expectations? So the fact that they're understanding that a firm wants TCP for a tax position, if they say, I want a tax position, will they actually sit for that? And I did find that a majority of students, on average, about 72% of the students are showing that, yes, they do intend on sitting for the discipline based on the role that they're interested in. So overall, our findings here, we found that firms prefer or have a strong PO fit. We found that they also prefer specific disciplines. So essentially, they prefer bar for auditing and consulting positions, and they prefer tax or TCP for tax. That is not surprising. The tax compliance discipline, of course, is meant to prepare someone for tax. What we did find interesting is that the business analytics reporting was more preferred for specifically an auditing position. One might think that the information systems and controls that talks about controls within auditing would be more preferred, but that was not the findings here. And then really understanding that that firms prefer a PO fit over a specific discipline. So when candidates go in, they can go in and understand, even if they don't have the specific preferred discipline, that as long as they are a good fit for the company, they will have a higher preference to hiring. Another thing that a candidate must go through and weigh is whether or not they are going to care more about the firm preference or whether or not they're concerned about pass rates. At this point in time, it looks as though the bar exam is the hardest exam of the three to pass at this point in time. So it is quite interesting that firms, for 2 of the 3 positions, end up preferring this one overall. SA2 then, summary, essentially from a theoretical standpoint, we established that candidates are more influenced by intrinsic factors versus extrinsic. From a more empirical standpoint, it may be that the CPA discipline motivation might be more multidimensional in nature. We are also finding, consistent with the theory of planned behavior, that students are seeing and essentially internalizing the subjective norm of firm preference, and then potentially would be acting on that as shown as their intent to sit for a specific discipline based on the role. Contributions for this. This will allow universities to allocate valuable resources to specific areas if they are very restrained by resources here. This also allows future candidates to understand where our firm preference is sitting at this point in time and make the best decisions for them. And then addressing the gap on how this discipline impacts hiring preferences. I do have a couple of limitations. For SA1, the biggest limitation I have here is that it is a small sample size. I went and I was surveying accounting CPAs who tend to be very busy individuals for many parts of the year, and my method of going through the CPA Society may not have been the best approach. And I also, that also constrained my geographical concentration. So most of my results were from Minnesota and Wisconsin. The newness of the CPA exam is another factor here. Firms might have a preference, but they may not fully understand quite yet how this is going to impact candidates and new accountants coming in the future. So they're making preferences and assumptions based on just the knowledge that they have at the time. And then lastly, this is a survey-based study. If I wanted to go back and make this more robust, I could have looked more specifically at the actions and behavior, the actual behavior of the firms itself. For SA2, the biggest limitation I had here was essentially I created these constructs based on theory rather than going and validating the constructs before using them within the survey. Again, it is a convenient sample, was a cross-sectional design, and these are self-reported perceptions. Again, this may or may not align with what essentially happens in real life. So for future studies, I've got quite a bit, but essentially many of them are addressing some of those limitations, and then also going beyond, really seeing, okay, once firms prefer this, does this impact future salaries for students? Is there, looking at the constructs, if I break down PO fit into its different pieces, looking at, for example, values or team fit, will that impact the preferences more or less? And then looking more specifically at a variety of different types of participants who work at Big Fours, looking at the differences in medium and small firms, et cetera. And then for SA2 future research, again, looking at setting up those motivational constructs ahead of time, maybe looking at more of a three-model factor instead, or three-factor model as opposed to just the intrinsic versus extrinsic. Looking at longitudinal behavior here of the candidates. Looking at information and signaling, so understanding how recruiting, internships, messaging shape students' perceptions of what firms prefer. And then, of course, the accuracy of those perceptions, really getting into understanding when and why students are accurate or inaccurate in maybe some situations, especially when looking at consulting roles, which seems to be a little bit more of a vague area. And that is my dissertation. Any questions?
All right, so Praveen, I go first, right? All right, cool. All right, well, great job.
Thank you.
So looking at your results of SA1,
yes.
ISC is sort of emerging as the black sheep of the CPA exam. And it's interesting to me because of all of the hype and pressure to, oh, you got to integrate AI into your classes. Right. You got to have more and more technology in your classes, right? And all of these audits, we're auditing the financial statements, but we're doing it from within the systems and the technology, right? And so as an accounting professor, I look at these results of like, no one cares about ISC, and I'm going, well, this seems contradictory. This seems like weird because these results would suggest that we should just keep teaching accounting like we taught it 20 years ago, just beat the crap out of financial accounting and tax accounting. So what do you think is sort of going on in why do they not like ISC? So what are, because I know you've also read lots of practitioner articles on this. So yeah, what's your take on why that is?
Yes. So thank you for your question. I think it might actually be a combination of a couple of things. I think first, the business analytics and reporting is more, as we know, a little bit more of the basics, the financial reporting, being able to understand the financials. My understanding is that generally, as a rule of thumb, firms believe that they can take someone in and teach them what they need to know. So for the sake of AI, if they need to bring someone new in, they can go ahead and teach them, how to use those types of tools when they're on the job. The second aspect is looking at my results. This survey was about a year ago. I feel like the AI has come out and really, in the last year or so has really kind of shown through and been more and more incorporated in the accounting world. I also think firms at the time just weren't sure how AI is going to be incorporated, and so they were when given the choice between somebody who was internal controls AI or somebody who knows the basics and is tested on the basics of analytics and reporting, they would rather somebody who has that reporting area.
All right, cool. My next question is about your interaction in study one with the PO fit and the PJ fit. Could you just talk a little bit more about like the story of just like what is happening that makes, what does that interaction mean, right? In like just straight up terms, right?
Yeah.
Why does that interaction exist, and like the theory and also the just practical explanation behind it?
Yeah, absolutely. So the theory behind it, and there was actually a lot of interesting enough contradictory articles on whether or not which one matters more. Is it the somebody's a good culture fit, or somebody basically has the credentials that we're looking for? Some articles said we want somebody who's just a fit. Another area said we want somebody who has the technical skills, and then some were like, well, we kind of need them in the combination of both. PO fit is typically not seen until we're at the interview process, right? Because somebody who's going and hiring, they oftentimes don't get to meet the person. They're just looking at something on paper. So in short, they're essentially looking at the PJ fit first, and then they're looking at the PO fit later on. So with this, what this is essentially saying is that the preferred discipline is important, regardless of which situation you're looking at. It just is more important if they are a good fit overall. Again, because they're looking at the credentials first, they're gonna be like, okay, we're gonna check the box and they're good. Maybe they meet other qualifications. But really establishing if they are a good fit, they're a good culture fit, essentially, that they're more likely to be hired overall.
Awesome, thank you. I just, while you were doing your ideas for future studies for study one, I don't think you have the data right now to do this, but so just sort of brainstorming here. Sure. If we could look at PO fit and PJ fit and the interaction when asked to people that work in specific practice areas, and you might have this data based on if you have the demographics on does the participant work in tax or audit or whatever. Okay. But I'm wondering what your thoughts would be on if this interaction would be impacted by the practice area. And I guess what I'm getting at with this is audit is more broad of you got to know manufacturing accounting, you got to know, financial accounting, and a little bit of tax, and you have to know audit methodology and everything. Whereas tax is a bit more narrow and a bit more of an expertise in that specific thing. Yep. And so do you think that PJ fit would be greater in like relative importance to a tax practitioner than potentially an audit or consulting? Do you think, have you run that, or do you think you would find you have run that?
So yes, I did. At one point I was just, again, playing around with the numbers. I'm a data analytics person, so I really, really like playing with the numbers. And so yes, I did use essentially what their role was. I used their years of experience and how long they've been CPA certified as controls for some of this. And then looking at this, essentially the years of experience and the CPA certification length didn't make any of a difference at this point. However, for the type of role, it didn't have a direct impact on PO fit or PJ fit as a main effect. It did, however, interact with that interaction effect there. So essentially this, as we're looking at the interaction between PO fit and PJ fit. And so, yeah, I would say in short, the interaction, yes. So as they're looking at, let's say somebody who is in tax specifically, and they're looking and wanting somebody in tax, that they would maybe potentially care more about either the PO fit or PJ fit. I didn't look further into specifically what areas were, or what the change was in the amounts as we're going through, but I did find that there is a difference on that interaction here.
All right, I think those are all my questions. So I think, Dimitri, you're up next.
One of the suggestions for this, your hypothesis currently says moderates, but I think it would be easier for readers if you just change it to enhances or amplifies, something that actually communicates the plus sign.
Right.
As the moderates communicates the negative sign. Anyway, that's just a minor thing. And then another one for presentation of the t-tests later on. I think you can just do those in a bar chart, right? And you can just have bar charts instead of 3 tables of 3 comparisons.
Okay.
You
Yes.
just have
Yes.
3 bar charts, and then it's
Uh,
all right there, and they're all significant, so you don't even need to.
I'll be
worry
honest.
about
I was trying to think of the best way of going about doing that, so I appreciate that.
Yep, no worries. And then I think what Jill brought up was actually quite interesting. With any survey, and these are surveys, not
Correct.
experiments, right? So with any survey, I think the most important question is, who are the respondents, right? And Jill kind of got to this with, well, who are telling you, for example, that TCP is most important for tax work? Is it the auditors? Because we wouldn't really care about that, right?
Right.
So if you can go back and see, do you find the same preferences if you cut your sample even more only to the people who actually work in the area for which they are responding? I think that would probably buy you some plausibility more. I guess that's also not a question, right? Yeah. All right. Oh, right. So here's a question. So, as you know, and as accountants know, the new hires get jobs like a year or two ahead of time, right? So, have you seen them kind of signaling what what discipline they want to take? Because they wouldn't have taken it yet. Right, like, it's like, what is the mechanism from which the firm would see this PJ fit?
Right. And so that's kind of it's somewhat interesting because to start off with the CPA exam, there is no area where you are required to say what discipline you are. And so the contribution for this is more so the ability to be able to basically set yourself apart. So when I'm going through and I'm advising, oftentimes that's the conversation I'm having with my students is, what can I do that'll set myself apart? And so that's more or less the contribution from before. And that is also when I was looking at my second essay is understanding, is it the firm's telling you should be taking this or not? So as I was looking at this, I was looking at it as the perspective of in this isolated bubble, they don't know, or they weren't being told what they should be taking ahead of time, and understanding that maybe some universities, as they're looking at students, might not interact with the students. I think in the Whitewater system, we do a very good job of making sure our accounting students interact with the firms often and early. But looking at it from a standpoint of universities that might not have the resources to be able to do those types of interactions, having students who maybe just don't engage in that kind of behavior.
And then one more question. This might be silly, but and you might expect this in a review. So did the respondents actually understand what goes into the bar versus ISC, right? Or students or professionals, right? If it's so new, professionals are not gonna go and look up, the details of it.
Sure. So before I presented the questions to the respondents, especially for the CPA, because I assume somebody who sat for the CPA is probably not looking at the new exam coming out. And so I did give them a brief overview of essentially the different disciplines and what it all entails before they go into the questions. That would be a good point, though, for the students. I don't believe I did include so much of a short overview. I think I walked in with the assumption that they already knew the differences.
Wonderful job. Thank you very much. I think this is not easy. And thank you for, such a, a long-term effort. So great presentations too. I have some comments and some questions for you. And the idea is how do we move the dissertation forward and finally publications. I hope that happen soon. So for SA1, I think let me begin with the comments. So I see you have one slide citing like a Cohen and also the power analysis. Could you go to that slide?
The power. This one right here?
Yep. Okay. So I think you already did the power analysis,
I did.
right?
Yes, I did.
And do you have any value from your power analysis?
Yes, so for the direct effects or for the main effects, I do have the amount, if I'm being specific, was 76 sample size, so I'm just short of that. And then, but however, for the interaction effect, it was much higher than that. And so this is where, I'm stating we did find that interaction effect. That's part of my limitations here is that, if I go back again, I would do go a different direction of trying to receive more respondents.
Yes, I think because this is a smaller sample size, so you already did. So you should claim the credit for your research.
Okay.
So you can put a number here. That's what I would like to suggest.
Okay.
So that will increase the credit of your presentation here. So that's one thing. And since you use a GLM, that's a regression.
Correct.
Did you include any controls?
I did not for the initial, just because I did not theorize having any controls at this point in the general model. I did, as I was mentioning to Jill, I did go back and include some of the controls that more or less I would believe would make sense, like I said, such as what position the participant was in, whether it was tax, audit, consulting, understanding years of experience, CPA certification, that's
Yes, I think you probably have those variables in your survey. For example, like a firm size.
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. I have
and
it as a general.
Age and how many years they work for the firm,
Right.
and so on.
Yes.
So if that's possible, you probably would put those into your like a regression model and rerun the entire regression and see how it goes. Probably the effect will be much stronger.
Yes.
Because control is to tease out the variation explained in the dependent variable. So since you use the subject of those accounts in the public firms, accounting firms, I think including those control, you can just try, and then I think they will probably strengthen and make your study more publishable.
Okay.
That would be my suggestion. So that's another thing. For SA1, so you talk about like a PO fit and a PJ fit.
Correct.
The first thing is I hope you could write the definition in your slide, even you don't read them, so we can see you have the well-defined like a construct. So it's
what my construct is.
Yes.
Essentially.
Okay. Yep. Okay, is that your definition?
Yes, essentially, yes. The PO fit is the alignment between a candidate's value and the culture fit of the firm.
Okay, so based on this, what's your scale, your majors?
My
scale. Your survey items.
Yeah, so for the PO fit, I essentially was using, let me see if I can find this, the likelihood to hire overall. So essentially looking at whether it's a very binomial factor in nature. So are they an immediate fit or are they not?
Okay.
Is what this measure is looking at.
Okay.
And then I also asked generally overall as well on a scale of, I think I used a Likert scale of 7, how much they value that, and it came out to a value of a mean of about 6.
Okay. So this is about dependent variable. This is not a PJ or PO fit measure. So I would suggest you have a table. And then you list all the construct names, and then all the item names under the construct. So they will make your like a table, make your like a presentation easier.
Easier for
Yeah,
others
yeah,
to
yeah.
understand.
So
Okay.
yeah, I believe you have that, but I think you just want to show people in a more organized way.
Sure,
So they
sure.
will be very helpful. Because I look forward to you make a presentation in other professional conferences.
Yes.
I think that will be very helpful. So that's something you can consider. This is just a comment, not a question. When you talk about a PO fit, and you mentioned that when you answer Gio's question, they don't know the value until they hire the applicants.
Right, the
So
interview.
people would have a question, okay, since you don't know, how do you measure PO fit in the front?
Right.
Okay.
And you can't. And that was something that I'd mentioned in my limitations, is that it's I don't know if I verbally covered it, but really understanding, yes, is that it would be better for the study if I actually went in and assessed at different stages of the actual looking at the resumes, for example, versus the interview and how those effects change.
Yeah, I think probably then another thought is, when the dissertation is already done, maybe you separate. Now you SA1 you use PJ fit as the main effect. Let's say your dependent variable.
Yes.
And the PO fit is another dependent variable, but you put them in the same model.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any way you can tease them out and make it into two models and use other moderators, right? For example, I'm thinking about a firm size. If a bigger firms would be more attractive
Right.
to those candidates.
Absolutely,
right?
looking at those different.
So you can thinking about use different moderators and then just split PO and PJ fit into two papers.
Okay.
So you don't need to put the PO PJ fit and put the interaction in the model.
Okay.
So thinking about other variations because this is kind of a extended study after your dissertation, and you can also make good use of your data too.
Right.
So you can think about that. The other thing is probably another design is you use the 73 as a pilot study, and then you can collect more data to test your new model, and then use a study 1 and a study 2, so you can have more papers.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, so there will be study 2. So thinking about that. So that's the idea about your ASA1. So I hope those are helpful.
Absolutely.
ASA2, would you please go to the summary of the H1 and the H2 ABC?
Oh, the summaries you said.
Yep. The hypothesis here.
Oops, this is gotta keep going.
Yep, excellent job. I think you did this in a very nicely. So here, because I know the time 45 minutes is really very limited. I give you a lot of pressure. Now you have more time. Can you pick something here? For example, like H1, I would like to know why you think, based on theory, intrinsic is more motivated.
Yes.
Compared to extrinsic factors. Can you explain why?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So absolutely. Looking at first, I was basing this kind of a combination of a couple of different things. So the theory of planned behavior is one area here that I'm really wanting to show. This is based on or has an element, the self-efficacy theory. By Bandura that I'm sure that you're very familiar with. So can I do it? Do I feel like I'm able to accomplish something? Is typically a big driver in behavior of doing something. And so using that as a first background here of students, do they believe that they can do it? Are they interested in it? More intrinsic type factors. The other element to this is prior research as well. So I mentioned Han and King and then Rawaman going through looking specifically at what factors motivate somebody going into, and this was general, going into the tax department, going into an audit profession, not looking specifically, of course, at the CPA exam itself. And they were finding that overall, these individuals were generally, again, motivated by intrinsic factors overall. So interest in the job, whether or not they felt like they could do it, whether they felt they were good at it, something of that nature.
All right, thank you very much. I do appreciate, more explanation about this. And the second one is about the H2A.
Yes.
So you compare the ABC and I see H2A, there is a keyword, will not.
Yes.
But the others are will be.
Yes, we talked about that.
Yes, and could you also explain to the audience why you think for the tax position will not be?
Yes, so the wording was definitely something I will need to work on for publication purposes, because what I didn't mean that the effects itself or the I guess in short the p-value is not going to be significant, but that essentially there would be no difference, or I was able to kind of reword it a little bit. What I should have said instead is that there would be a strong alignment between what what candidates' perceptions of the preferences are versus the actual preferences. And so that's essentially the wording of it. We played around with the wording quite often throughout this entire process, and still just didn't quite get it down. I did try, but I realized I failed to update it later on. I did try to reword it there will be a significant alignment between that would be the wording, but I would love your feedback on that as well.
This is much better.
Okay.
Because the previous one will not, means there is no difference.
Right.
Yeah. So this is much better. I like this one much better. And then I think that's good. That's clarified. Thank you very much. And the other thing is, I know some of the questions actually you wrote them yourself, and if that's based on an existing scale from a study or something, I would suggest that you just put a citation there.
Okay. Absolutely.
So that's increase your credit of this process. And could you go to the correlation table? Yep, here. Okay, so I think you probably want to establish convergent and discriminant validity.
Yes.
Before you show this table. If you show this correlation like a table, and the people see you have a very high correlations among some of the variables, and there will be a concern if they are too similar, and actually they are not. There is no difference between the two ideas. Make sense?
Yes,
so I think you would like to do that. So they will be very helpful. Another thing is, would you please repeat the sample size of the SA2?
Yes, it was 143.
143.
I did not put that in. It does not state.
Yeah, I would like to suggest you to also put the information there too, because for sure you have much higher power.
Yes.
And that's also your credit too. The EFA table, just a comment. Okay, so at the end, you can see a factor number 3, easiest to pass, and that's a reversed item minus, right?
Right, correct.
So sometimes, reviewers, read things very quickly. They could, skip this part. I would suggest that when you operationalize, when you do the statistics, you probably reverse it back.
Okay.
So the direction will be the same.
Okay.
Like the other two.
Yes.
And that will be much easier. You just put a note there. The effect is the same, but you don't want to create a cognitive bump.
Yes.
For those reviewers when they read your paper. Okay, I think that's what I have. And the final one is I want to give you my best wishes and congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I very much appreciate
Thank you.
First of all, congratulations. This was a great presentation. You demonstrated mastery of the literature. Your tests were really good. I'm so impressed, especially with 73 to get, significance. It's not hard. So well done. And we've been connected for a while, and I know how, this was a journey for you, and we have members of cohort 12 here. So, I just want you to share with them like what that was like for you and what kind of advice you have for them to help, to finish. Because like I said, I'm really impressed, congratulations.
Thank you very much. Yes, I appreciate the question. I'm always happy to share this. Yeah, so I did hit a lot of roadblocks along this. In full disclosure, I am cohort 8. I am officially the last individual of our cohort, and I'm 100% of us all have now defended here. So very excited. So yeah, overall, I think in short, the biggest thing is don't give up. There's gonna most likely be times that you're gonna be like beating your head on the wall and saying, I don't know what's going on, or I'm really frustrated with things. I think the other biggest thing is when you find your committee, refer back to them. There's multiple times where I would be texting Jill and say, Jill, can I meet with you really quick? And she'd talk me off a ledge, such as yesterday. And so there's definitely lean on your committee. They know what they're doing. They know their stuff. They've been doing this oftentimes for multiple years. And then the last thing I would say, last piece of advice is I'm hoping somebody said at the beginning that even just 15 minutes a day of getting that, working on your dissertation, take that to heart. It's so easy to get caught up in life, put stuff aside and say, I'll work on it later. I'll work on it Saturday when I have extra time. And then all of a sudden it's been 3 weeks and you haven't touched it. As you can tell, that was some of my situation here. And so definitely make a very big effort of trying to at least look at it. Just open up the Word document at least once a day. That would be my advice to the team. Wonderful, thank you.